For this particular episode of Circuit Spotlight, we are of course jumping back into the world of Gran Turismo, and very few circuits put as big of a smile on my heart, if you will, as this one. It is by far my favourite city course of the entire Gran Turismo series, and probably one of my favourite city courses, if not my favourite one from any game, at least off the top of my head. It is of course Seattle Circuit, a track which we've kind of seen in Gran Turismo 5, but not really. It was a hidden course, and if you look around online there is some footage of people who have accessed that track in the game, but officially speaking it was featured in Gran Turismo 2, 3, 4, Gran Turismo PSP, Tourist Trophy, technically in the demo GT 2000, and also of course is, as I said, hidden in the data of GT5. And in the realm of teasing or seeing Seattle Circuit featured, we're actually going to come back to that point, because one of my favourite things about doing this series is sometimes the trivia associated with certain circuits, and more often than not there'll be at least one tidbit in there that I didn't know, even about a track that I loved, and that is definitely the case here, and we'll certainly return to that point later on because it's a pretty fascinating one. In fact, in a similar way to how some of the Vision GTs and their associated trailers gave us teasers of circuits which are yet to come back, such as back in Gran Turismo 6 where we saw Monaco, for example, which of course is still not back in Gran Turismo as yet, 2 entire games later. That though is of course for another time. Now technically there were 2 different versions of Seattle in the broad sense. Of course in terms of graphics and stuff like that it's changed over time, but in the broader sense we have the one primary version, and back in Gran Turismo 2 there was the short course as well. We're going to be focusing here more so on the full circuit, and I will feature footage that I have from basically every time I've raced on it here on YouTube, from GT4 and GT2 in particular. It's a 2.37 mile circuit, so not particularly long really, and part of the footage here you'll see is some of my oldest on the channel from way back in the potato cam days, where I literally do a lap backwards in a minute and a half, just in reverse gear all the way around in a chaparral. So that's the level of love and commitment I have to this track, inside and out, backwards and forwards I guess you could say. Now that equates to just over 3.8 kilometers, and even when you're driving forwards like a normie, it still doesn't take that long of course to do a lap of the track in a road car and a race car. And speaking to its use, it is a heavily used circuit in every Gran Turismo game to feature it. You've got stuff like the 4-wheel drive cup, there's endurance races like the 100 miles of Seattle which appears in multiple games, of course the muscle car cup, the Shelby Cobra Cup, but it's also featured of course in the kind of championships and series which any Gran Turismo player will immediately recognise, things like Stars and Stripes, the Formula GT series, even the Polyphony Digital Cup. It's a very, very heavily used circuit, even of course in missions, in Gran Turismo 4, it's all over the place. One of the curious bits of trivia about this course though, which incidentally has roughly 15 turns, and of course as I always like to do, we'll come back to the point of our favourite turn later on in the video. I certainly have one, and I feel like for some of you, you might hate the turn that I've picked, and for more than a few you'll probably love it for the exact same reason that I do. This is a course which, to go back to that point on trivia, actually always lags behind reality. And of course that's nothing new for Gran Turismo, we do tend to get things a bit later than in real life in terms of not just courses but certainly vehicles as well. But apparently the version of Seattle which is featured in every game to have it is technically already outdated by a number of years compared to real life, but not even in a way that they couldn't have accounted for. For example, back in Gran Turismo 4, which was what, around 2004, 2005-ish, the course had already been different since the year 2000 in terms of some of the background stuff. So in typical Polyphony fashion, it's kind of lagging behind reality. I don't think many of us care too much though, and incidentally of course, as many of you will already know, because this is one of the main things that most players seem to know about Seattle, until relatively recently you could drive on an almost exact version of the track in real life. Of course you'd have to disregard some street signs and stuff, but you could map it out onto Google Earth. That has since changed though, in particular when it comes to the Lumen Convention Center and the associated field. So the roads aren't quite the same as they used to be, and I believe, if memory serves, I think New York had a similar thing happen. I don't recall all the details on that one, and we'll talk about New York in a future episode, another one of my favourite circuits when it comes to the city side of things in Gran Turismo. That second bit of trivia which I tease though, before we get to the point of our favourite turns, is one which I found fascinating. Now I'm not going to feature the full trailer because it's from IGN, I don't know what they're like with claiming stuff, but I'll feature a couple of screen grabs. This was actually featured as an updated circuit in a very similar vein to how it was hidden in GT5 in kind of a playable sense, at least for some people. It was featured in a trailer, a Gran Turismo 5 era trailer if I recall correctly, teasing the Acura NSX concept. And like I said, I'll feature a couple of stills there. That I find fascinating because that is what I'm talking about when I said about Monaco in GT6, and if memory serves, I believe even the Lamborghini Vision GT. I think I did did a video about it as well, kind of teased Monaco. I think it was in its rearview mirror or something in the case of that one. It's always easy to just kind of write it off as, oh, it's a licensing issue or whatever the case may be. But if that's the case, you would think you'd get the licensing sorted before you develop the track, I would have thought. You know, you go to all of this effort only to at the last minute find that you can't use it. That seems like the wrong way of doing things. So I find that a bit hard to believe here, and the fact that they did update it, I find that quite fascinating. The only thing I could maybe think of is that they were, certainly in the case of GT Sport and GT7, as I've mentioned before, definitely trying to push the more sort of realistic side of circuits, if you will, rather than the more fanciful or fictional tracks, because yes, we have stuff like Trial Mountain or Deep Forest, but many of them are heavily modified, they feel more grounded, they're not quite as over the top or arcadish. Grand Valley is another prime example, feels much more grounded now, much more realistic, and to me that's a shame because you can simultaneously imagine Seattle coming back because it is a real world location, so you can't really argue about the reality of it, but also the fact that it has that triple jump, which I believe I've mentioned on the channel before. That is probably something which would break the immersion a little bit when it comes to said realism, because at the end of the day it's not like the Nürburgring where you get a little bit of airtime. This is like full-on triple jumps up the hill, and that's just not really realistic, and it certainly wouldn't look very realistic. Now, I could be completely off base there. It seems like as good of a guess as anyone's got, aside from the obvious one of just saying licensing over and over again. So whatever the case may be, they don't seem to be interested in bringing it back anytime soon, and of course that brings us to the final point of corners or turns. For me, this is a pretty easy one because I love basically every turn here on the track, but for me it has to be turn number 15, the final corkscrew, if you will, right before the start finish line. If you get it wrong, you get it really wrong, and you'll stop dead by slamming into the wall right next to the pit lane. Or maybe even a few of us have had the unfortunate mishap of bouncing off of the AI and inadvertently being pushed into the pit lane, which is incredibly annoying when that happens. But if you really get it right and absolutely nail that corner, a very Dragon Trail-esque kind of corner, but of course before Dragon Trail, you can not only make up a huge amount of ground over the AI and expand your lead, but if they have somehow got ahead of you, maybe you had to pit in, whatever the case may be, you can make up a lot of ground in terms of catching up to them. So for me, as I said, I absolutely adore Seattle. This is probably my favourite circuit of the ones which we've talked about so far, both in Gran Turismo and in other games. And you'll have noticed I haven't really touched on the real world circuits, stuff like the obvious ones like Le Mans, the Nürburgring, etc. just yet. We will, of course, but I've been focusing in more so on tracks which are very distinctly from a certain game, so ones which are very Forza or very Gran Turismo, rather than circuits which appear in a wide variety of games. We will get to those, but for the moment I like the series to feel a bit more specific, if that makes sense, to these individual titles. That's it overall for my thoughts though. I would absolutely love to see Seattle and New York for that matter come back, certainly a lot more so than Monaco in my case. I don't see it honestly happening anytime soon. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Maybe if you are a more recent player, does this look like the kind of track you would enjoy driving on? And of course, if you are an OG like myself and many others, was this one of your favourites, or perhaps did you hate Seattle for whatever reason? I'll see you in future, of course, for more episodes. Next time we will move away from Gran Turismo again, as we do, working back and forth with each odd and even episode. And of course it goes without saying, but if you are new to the series and this is the first episode you've watched, you should click the playlist link right below in the description or here on screen to check out the previous and future episodes as well. But for now, thanks for watching.